thought I'd make a video because I haven't made a video on a few topics. I don't think I've ever, yeah, I don't think I've, yeah, I haven't ever talked about this. And this is about Kasie Rickels, who, um, who passed away, and I don't know the story to this, but if she was alive, she'd be able to verify this. And I talked about this. This is a really sensitive subject. There's several people that know about this. I want to say Ricky knew about this. I think he did. He possibly didn't. I know Brian did. I don't know who else did. But the reason I say this is because when she had done this, she was very young, and I talked about that she went into the woods, and she was extremely depressed. And Brian Yockey told me more than one occasion. And many years ago, they built like a clubhouse behind Brian Yockey's house in this like patch of woods, and him and like several other friends and other people went there and built a bunch of ropes and like a clubhouse and spent like hours just working on it. Anyway, somebody ended up destroying all of it. But I recall that Kasie had, at that time she was around Brian Yockey, and I want to say I was in 7th grade when she did this. It was in the same grade that, because, okay, I know this sounds weird, but when I saw Kasie and I was in 7th grade, I was just floored how beautiful she was. I was like, this is Barbie. This is Barbie. I mean, her face was so symmetry. She was exactly at what I think of this, her face and her bleach blonde hair. And she had these tank thighs, she was built like a tank. And I remember she has sort of like big feet, and she had seemed to have like oversized feet. But she was built like a tank. And I remember thinking of that. She was just built like a tank. Like she had the equipment to build, a phenomenal physique. But anyway, I remember she used to wear these short shorts, and I was just like very scared and nervous because I was like, wow, I've never been so girls with so pretty and white and blonde hair. With a girl with that type of bleach blonde hair like that, and her eyes and the way that she looked, I knew I could get in trouble if I could talk to her too long. And but luckily I was in a class, the teacher wasn't very prejudiced. And I believe to this day, the reason I even sat next to her was because the teacher saw me googling eye at her. And Ms. Hine, who, for those that were in her class, knew, I believe she playing matchmaker. She was a non-racist. She was a white woman, very tall. I don't think she could have been a transgender. I don't think so. I don't think she was. No, I don't think she was. And whatever her life was, she wasn't a really bad teacher. She was a kind of like the teacher that likes dressing up, sexy kind of, and going to school as a teacher, but is kind of picks at the kids to make sure they do what they're supposed to do. Very strong mental woman, but she was very non-racist. I could definitely tell. And I recall she came in after a couple of days, and I had class with her in language arts. And I remember her, after talking to her, after sort of breaking the nerves of it, she sat behind me, and then I think sat next to me, and I talked to her a couple of times, and she could tell that she was looking at me, and I could tell that I was really just kind of like a very kind of nervous puppy, because she was very calm, just very secure and calm of who she was, right? And that usually, in my opinion, usually comes with usually a very strong presence of family members or genetics. You're just not a nervous type person. Or it also comes with the comfort of she's blonde and blue-eyed, meaning everywhere she goes in life, she's going to get catered and open doors more, and also bad ones. And in my opinion. but she's very likely to be treated sort of serenaded because she the blue eyes and the blonde hair and this Barbie-looking girl. So after maybe like a couple of months, I think, I remember her in one of the situations, because I only sat next to her, or she was near me, probably at least maybe a couple of months the entire year. Other than that, she sat in a different classroom. I mean, different part of the class. Yeah, different part of the classroom. And I remember turning around and looking at her. She was very plush, like very stimulated as a woman. Like when a woman has several orgasms, and then like the day after, or within several hours, or maybe even in 2 days, depending on how well the structure of the female organ is, because it's just like guys. Some guys have, big dongs. Some guys, just have average. Some guys have tiny, tiny, tiny. It all ranges. But from person to person, it determines your genetics. It's just like brain function and blood function, heart function, okay? Maybe you have a little bit of extra nerves. Maybe you actually don't actually have extra nerves or sensation. But she looked very stimulated, without a doubt. And I could say, I remember her doing this, and she was kind of like this, and just kind of like, and looking at me, but in a very sort of, it was attractiveness. Like, it wasn't just like she was sort of attracted, but I remember seeing the plush. And immediately, I knew this at this age. I was like, she had to have sex with somebody. Because even at that time, when all I thought about was sex. Losing my virginity, right? And see what girls were available. And I recall her, I remember she used to be good friends with this girl that had a chipped tooth by the name of Carol. She was another blonde girl. I think she used to work at Golden Chick in Addison. But she had a chipped tooth, but she was really good friends with Kasie, and they got along really great. They were really good friends. And I used to always see them how they grouped up with one another, and she was kind of like her white girlfriend, right? So anyway, one day she comes in, and I'm just like, kind of like prowling. Is she available? I wonder if she has guys. There's no way she has to have a guy in her life. This is before Brian Yonke was ever dating her, or even knew her. And I remember her coming in, and she looked very plush, and there was bullet point to me, someone screwing her. And I remember thinking to myself while I was in class, oh, she must have got with some 14 or 15-year-old kid. He's probably screwing the hell out of her. And I wasn't mad at her. I was, in a way, taking ownership. And it felt like, at that time, but I didn't tell her that. That's why I was resembling anger. Resembling jealousy, I guess. Like, because, when you're a kid and you're trying to lose your virginity, especially when you're a kid, sex is climax at a very peak level, very differently mentally than it is emotionally than it is when you get older, right? And when I saw her, there was no doubt somebody was screwing her. Somebody was. But I remember her sitting back to me, and I did think of, well, could this be a child? Could this be a sexual predator? Her dad or someone maybe screwing her? Because at that age, there is 100%. You got to understand. When I grew up, aside from Frankie being molested and raped so many times, and it happened to me a few times, my mother used to always tell me and expressions and be like, one of my cousins, or a couple of my cousins got raped and molested as well, and there were girls, at least one of them were, and my mother went into graphic detail telling me. So I was a very young age, even from my mother telling me, be careful and be on the lookout for a rapist at a very young age. Because, like for an example, this is how I'm going to apply this metaphor, this formula of how I perceived at a very young age, is this person getting raped or molested? who's having sex. He said a cousin, an uncle, or whatever, if they look like they were having sex. And like the way that I did that was because my mother told me when I was a kid, she was like, oh, so and so cousin, she went over to her mom and she kept on tying herself. I don't know how you say it in Spanish. Estaba tallándose mucho aquí. She was grabbing herself a lot like this, like kept on rubbing herself, like she le dio mucho asco, and it's like saying she was getting a lot of bothered, and she went up to her mother and she said she kept on bothering her, and she said it hurt right there, and she was very young. She was, I think, 4 or 5 years, anywhere from 4 to 6 years old. She was tiny. And she said that she went to my aunt, and then they found out she was molested. Someone had raped her. Someone had fondled her and inserted either, I don't know if it was a penis, raped her fully, or fingered her. Someone did something. Same thing happened with my aunt. Well, I guess I can go with names about this because, obviously everything is being blurted out. Lucero, who is Veronica, so I didn't know Veronica is, I think, is a transgender. I didn't know that. I had no fucking idea. It was my own cousin, who I was around a number of times. But I was told that my Uncle Poncho, who is a boxer, this is the same boxer guy who lived with my Mati, which was my mom's sister, who I didn't know was a transgender, I think, as well. And he was from Mexico, and he was the one that saved me and Frankie, and he put me on his shoulders, and I started to cry because I was scared, because in Mexico back in those days, I was so unused to being thrown into the terrain like that. When you get thrown into Mexico like that and you live, it's like a really rich person that's been sheltered their whole life. If you throw them out to the real world and just throw them in the fucking pool to see if you can swim, that's exactly what happened when we went there, into Mexico. And I was scared. I remember crying because I was thinking to myself, I was like, it was getting dark, and it was like the sunset was going down, and he said, no, don't get scared. He goes, no te asustas. And he set me down because he was carrying me like this, because I was trying to catch up because, they were running in front of me, and they were going to leave me, and I was trying to run, and they were outrunning me, and I was 5 years old at the time. And my uncle said, he put me down, and he said, and I talked about this, and I drew pictures, and he started throwing all this badass, he's real tiny and short. He's real tiny and short, and he started throwing these badass fucking, like a professional boxer. Like if you see like a little short, tiny guy, like how he throws punch. He was structured like a boxer. I still remember it looked like he had like the fucking, the Nikes that used to little pump air into. They kind of looked like that, and they were all white shoes. He had pants on, tight pants on, and a muscle tight T-shirt. And he said, "No, no te asustas. Mira, if somebody comes, like se va a pelear." And he was like eating an onion. He had a habit of eating raw onions, and to my knowledge, to his belief, he believed that eating raw onions, like if you do a fucking apple, had like an extra super strength that it gave you. I don't know. Anyway, this is Mexico, right? This is in 1989. No, was it 1989? This is like 1990, I want to say, because it was before that Julian was born. Julian was born in 89. This is 1988. Right, I'm about 4 to 5 years old. And anyway, we go, and so I'm trying to get to where I was with this story. So I know this is about Kasie. So anyway, that happened, and so he lived with my Aunt Lupe, and all the circle in our family, he was responsible for raping 2 of my cousins, the little girl and my Veronica, which was I found out later, I had to have been a fucking fake lie. I don't know what the situation is, but he is related to his son, which I don't know whatever happened if he got kicked out of our entire family like I did many years ago. And all the family, Lupe and Mati were the main ones, and even my uncle said that, he molested and raped, you know, and my uncle Beto said he saw him he was chasing him one time. He saw him in the highway. I don't even know if that was true or not. But they excluded him because he was a rapist. And he fled to Mexico to be a paleto. That means, you know, you see those ice cream guys that sell ice creams in the trucks? And he moved to Mexico, and then he disappeared. Nobody ever heard from him again. But nobody ever knew the story that he did for me and Frankie. He took us away, and he took us to a volleyball game in court. And we went to, like, this gym in downtown, and there was, like, a high school team or an adult team. And we were sitting, and Frankie had just been brutally fucking raped. Frankie eyes were red. He looked at Frankie and he goes, "Oh." And he was just kind of like, you know. And he didn't say very much. He really didn't talk so much. And then I left, and I think I sat down maybe somewhere else, front row or a couple seats. Maybe got something to drink, but he could have exchanged words with Frankie. I don't know what he had said. But everything there was just like his body language and everything was just, you know, just like, you know, having the situation controlled and kind of just. So anyway, I never heard from him again. This is why I excluded Lupe and Mati. There was something very toxic about what was going on because I didn't know the network, what they were doing about this fame or any money that was going. They were after my dad's money, period. And after my mother. And so I was the number one protector. I was fucking the guardian for my mother. So they knew they had to exclude me. Once you do that, you can just milk her. And milk all the emotions you want and just take whatever you want and make it. And that's exactly what they did. So anyway. So I understood that the behavior that comes from a person that you think you trust is very nice and willing to be kind to you, willing to rape you. Because he was family. He spent Christmas with us a couple of times, and he came over to our house and lived at our house a few times, and he disappeared. And so someone like that to show up and then take off was that of the instinct of understanding that any family member can be a victim, victimize your kid, to fucking fuck them and rape them. So as a kid, even when, I was probably about, I think I was like 8 or 9. I was like 9 years old, 9 or 10 years old, maybe even anywhere from 8 to 10 years old. When my mother told me, she said that Poncho had taken off and he had raped both of my cousins. Vero, he had been raping for 2 years. Every time that she had gone to work is what the story was. For 2 years, this is what my mother told me. She says that for 2 years he had been raping her. Vero, who is Mati's daughter, had gone. Mati, my mother's sister, who showed up to my dad's funeral, she worked the night shift. And so when she worked the night shift, this is whenever he basically was in charge of babysitting. He was raping my cousin for 2 years. And one day she came home and all his shit was gone and he disappeared. And Julian had told me this conversation. Me and Julian had this conversation before, saying, "Yeah, I can't believe he did that." You know, he said they said that he just showed up to Mati's house and he was gone. And this is the same house. This is the same apartment where was right across the street from R.L. Turner. I used to live at those ghetto ass apartments. These are like the ghettoest fucking hood apartments you can get in fucking Carrollton, Farmer, nearly any part of the city. He was like the ghettos. Everyone that knows it went to R.L. Turner. Right across the street, right behind Taco Bell. Nick Carrera's dad used to live there, and Nick Carrera himself, this is where I believe he was raped. This is where the conversation happened, because I remember the conversation between Mom, Lupe, and someone else, and that they knew some other kid that got raped over there by their uncle. And it was Nick Carrera's dad. Nick Carrera's relative had done this to him. So anyway, I think it's important for me to talk about this. So I understood this at a very young age. It was a common thing for me to always look at girls, when I was even that were my own age or younger. Even if I felt attracted to them, it was always a question to me: could an uncle be raping them? Could their mother be raping them or touching them or something? It was always constantly like that. So when Kasie showed up, it was very sort of vivid in my mind, right? And I remember even feeling this sort of ownership. Like I never expressed this directly to her, but I remember looking and just thinking to myself, some fucker. And I always, at the time, very young, is that she made that choice to want to have sex with a young boy. And I'm like, because virginity was very important. But that short lasted, and I didn't say anything. I just knew that because she's not available, somebody's screwing her. But there was no doubt that somebody was screwing her. So this is around the time that I was hanging around. I started hanging around Brian, and I saw this girl, and I was like, oh, that's Kasie. But Brian Yaki had no fucking idea how much I knew her before he did. In fact, Kasie used to hang around Perla, and he used to be into the whole witchcraft shit, like Blair Witch type shit, or witchcraft. When they were in 6th grade, I was told, because I used to have conversations in school, and I knew one of Kasie Rickels' best friends, which was a really tall girl, and I was really good friends with her too, and I was in a science class, and she used to always tell me that her dream was to be a stripper. And this girl was overly infatuated with wanting to be a stripper. And she would talk about, like, shit that no other female, and she was really tall, too. So, anyway, and so I had an idea how one of Kasie Rickles' friends were. I had an idea of it. So, anyway, I'm in 7th grade, and I never said anything to them because, she was white, and then they played the whole white supremacist shit on me, like, oh, we're white, she's a white girl, we know her. They take her in. They don't know that I had classes with her, and Kasie didn't know I was good friends with Perla, right? So, a couple months go by. I used to always see her walk by. Seen her several times with Brian Yaki walking, because we used to always go to the dollar movies, walking down the alley, jumping over the wall, and it was about a mile walk. All of us, me, Daniel, Robert, Barry, Vandy, Brian, all of us. We used to, every day go to the fucking dollar movies, and we used to go play video games in dollar. It was a dollar movies. We could watch a movie for $1, and sometimes watch movies for free and sneak in. So all the kids used to go there who's had flexible parents, and this is where I started to meet girls from other schools. So she one day went over there, and I was told, like 6 months after it happened, that Kasie had gone in there, and Brian was like, "You're not gonna believe what she did. She went in there, and Kasie put the noose around her neck." And he said that she climbed up, and this happened, I think, more than once. She climbed up, and she fucking jumped, and I don't know, because Brian Yaki had a very bad habit of lying a lot, like lying about a lot of shit, and so did Daniel. They had habits of fucking lying about how much money they had sometimes, or what they were involved in. And anyway, or making up stories. I knew which ones did. Daniel not so much, but I knew Brian. They said Brian had a habit of making up lying stories and shit. So it was like a envy feeding energy type shit. Anyway, so she had jumped, and said that she had climbed, and she had a noose around her neck and jumped. And then, like, he told me again, he said no, and she said that there was a noose, a rope, and I've been in there before. There was like a rope, but it was like you climb up the rope, and she had put it around her neck, and I don't know where she got like something, and she jumped, and she hung herself. Brian said that he said that she ended up missing. She went missing somewhere. And he said that he walked in there. Obviously, if a girl's putting around a fucking, your girlfriend or the girl you're close with is putting a rope around her neck, you're going to stop her, right? We're all like 12, 13, 14 years old. And at the time, I'm 13. So he said that he couldn't find Kasie, or she disappeared, or he left from her house. And he said he went to go see if she might be at the clubhouse. And he said that he saw her hanging. And that he, like, picked her up and pulled her off. And, like, she was, like, gasping for air. She was trying to kill herself. Kasie was 12 to 11 years old, because Kasie didn't skip any grades, to my understanding, if I remember correctly. She was on school on time, and I had already failed one grade. And my age, even if I had not failed, I was still like sort of 6 months older than all the other kids. So I was 13 right when I started 7th grade. I want to say Kasie, I don't know when's her birthday, but she was 12 years old when this happened. 12 to 13, no older than 13. She was like 12 when this happened. And Brian had told me this. So ultimately, I never said anything. And Brian told me, who did he tell? He told, there used to be this kid named Jeremy. He drives 18-wheelers, and he lives right behind Brian Yankee. And I think his dad was a doctor, was one of my doctors at some point, gave me a physical a couple of times. Anyway, she ended up, life moves on, and I used to watch her behavior, so it was very weird, because she never knew that I knew. Brian didn't tell a whole lot of people. I want to say I don't know who else, there was someone else he told me other than me. It could have maybe just been me. I don't know. But anyway, I know he had to tell somebody. I don't want to say he told Daniel and Ricky. I want to say, because we all kind of talked with it, and I didn't know Brian terribly well, like Daniel claimed to have. For him to tell me something so personal like that, in the way that he expressed it, he was like I needed to do something. And he was like, "You're not gonna believe, like, she hung herself, dude. Yeah, she put a noose around her neck." And I was in total shock how anybody that beautiful could, blonde hair, blue eyes, and that beautiful, like, she looked like a blessing. And so I never said anything. So I watched her behavior a lot when I worked with her, when I went to school, how she smiled, never knowing that I knew that she had put her noose around trying to hang herself. I was always very nice to her, where I just wouldn't say anything, because I was really shy. To me, I always saw her as that she's taken. And, I just knew it was dangerous for me to talk to somebody that had that was a girl. Because, you get a lot of shit. Everybody understands in high school and in middle school at times. So, she ended up working with me when I got to IHOP, along with John, Basili, Cisco, Raquel, who else? Anthony. There was 4 of us. Me, I only worked there for about no more than 2 months. I didn't work there for no more than 2 months. Cisco worked there for like 6 months, maybe even a year. John Basili worked there for at least 6 months, maybe even a year. Anthony Basili worked there for a long time. And it used to be all of us. As a matter of fact, this is how racist it was. Out of every single day that I had ever worked at IHOP, I made the least amount of money out of all of them. And I was the only colored person. Cisco made more money than I did, but every time we used to pull out our other monies and say, "How much you make?" And Anthony was walked out with like $150, even $170. And back then, $170 for a waiter and tips was fucking, they're dropping loads of cash too. And we'd always pull out, and I'd walk out with like $25, $30 for the tips. Like, I made drastically, like, heck, damn, man, you didn't make shit. And we understood by looking at each other, you were estimated by how much money you made by how you looked. So if you were white, you were going to make a lot more money. And I know all the white people made money. And since I was the only colored person, I always made the least, and I was always understood. Kasie was a manager at that time when I worked there, or one of the managers, because I remember she was like a manager. She had that manager outfit. I knew that she had recently had an abortion. Not an abortion, a miscarriage. She had gotten pregnant, and it was always kind of like I was like a sort of like a side dog when I was around Casey and Brian, because I always saw Brian and Casey had been together, and they were like the match-made Barbie and Ken match-looking couple. So I worked with her. We got along with her pretty well and talked to her. It felt pretty good her being a manager, because they found a reason for me to be able to talk to a blonde-haired white girl like that and be comfortable, because it was, especially when they're young. The white guys don't care about anything. Once they get the first, then if there's any leftover trash, they might give that to you. But it's always understood that they eat first. It's always like that. And even total strangers will kind of scold you away from that. You never met when you speak to a white blonde girl, and they'll look at you. I'll be talking to her, and then some guy will walk in, in the restaurant, and I'm a waiter, and he'll look and he goes, like, give you this look. It's not of his approval that you're speaking to, because he might link himself and wants to fuck this girl, right? But it was very professional to me. It was very, very professional in the sense of, she's my manager, she's been taken. I've known her for a long time, and I knew. So the way that I sort of felt bad for her, because I knew she was hiding something very deep. I was working with her one day, and I didn't say anything. And I said, yeah, he goes, yeah, I remember, and I didn't know how to, how do you go to somebody saying, hey, I know about you trying to hang yourself with the rope. You're like 16, 17 years old. You don't know how to, you don't go to your friends at that age and say shit like that, especially a girl. And I didn't want her to, I don't know how she's going to react to it, but if she did react to it, it wasn't going to be, I don't think, a crying. It was going to be probably frustration and anger. And I remember talking to Casey, and I said, and we were talking about something, yeah, Brian Yockey and all this other stuff, and Daniel, or whatever. And I said, yeah, you used to go over to the clubhouse, remember, a long time ago? And I talked to her, and she was like counting money or something at the register, and I was talking to her, and she sort of froze, like, and she goes, he goes, how did you know that? You knew that? He goes, yeah, Brian told me that you used to go over there with us, and all the other guys, because, and I did that because I didn't want her to know that, because she only showed up there a couple of times, and Brian had a tendency to over-exaggerate things at times as well. So I was walking with, talking to her, and then I noticed that she, I had to go back to work. It wasn't too busy. There's a couple people come in, so I go back to work, waiting, getting orders. And Casey was in the kitchen, and I'm walking with her, and there isn't maybe one other person there. And this is like a night shift. This is like it was already night. It was like 2-3 hours. It was sunset. It was about 7:30, 8 o'clock. I think I left at 11. And I remember her walking and changing her attitude. Like, I immediately knew I could tell she knew that, because she said, Brian told me that? Yeah, Brian told me that you used to go, you went over there with all the other guys. And I kind of moved like that, like scared, because in a sense that I knew something that she, because she only been there a couple of times. And there had been no reason. And I remember her kind of going like I could immediately feel like the sense that she was thinking to herself, Hector, Brian was totally, and she looked up ahead and like had piercing, angry eyes, but not at me. She was like, as soon as I said, Brian told you that? And she was like thinking of Brian, like Brian was getting his ass kicked or some shit. I didn't say anything, but it was the way that I kind of let her know, because I knew that my behavior around her was pretty comforting in the sense and very communicative, and I just communicate with her because I knew she would gravitate. I knew she could gravitate, and she did a couple times, right? So, and every time I sat at the dinner table, it was very just mutual conversation. There was very attractive, but it was, to me, it was always that she was taken. She had her own life, and I just happened to be a part of the group of friends, happened to be around the friends, boyfriend she was around, because I was very extensively, like, I knew the people that lived next door to Brian, who used to drive the Dodge Viper, who owned the Bicycle Exchange, because I used to go to Bicycle Exchange when I was a kid for 4 or 5 years, getting my flats fixed with my dad. I used to get tune-ups and take my bicycle there, and I could tell you some racist shit that happened there when I was a kid. They wouldn't even want to fucking fix our tire when I was a kid. This is a true story, because I was Mexican. We walked in there, and the guy did not want to fucking, was getting an attitude, and I was like 9 years old. But anyway, that's another story. But there were several owners. I don't know if he was the same owner at that time, but he lived next door to Brian Yankee, and I knew this guy, and this guy was like an extreme adventurer. He had like dreadlocks, like Jamaican dreadlocks. I forgot what they call it. It's not just like dreadlocks or braided, but it's like a, you ever seen those Jamaican sort of hair, white guy? It was a white, tall guy, real skinny. And you ever seen those guys that like jump out of airplanes and fucking do the Red Bull gliding and shit, you know, or do bungee jumping and shit off cliffs and shit, or bike riding and extreme sports? That's him. That's exactly who this guy is. And he drove a Dodge Viper, and he was like 28 years old. Anyway, he was doing that, and so I knew the structure of a lot of the places pretty well. I knew the structure to some degree pretty well, and because I was around, it was very extensive that I used to hang around Robert, and every day I would watch Kasie walk by. I mean, Brian Yankee's Pegs driving her home from her dad. I knew that Brian Yankee was always talking about how much sex they had, and Daniel, because Daniel was always showed an obsession over Kasie. And it was hard for me to talk about this because they didn't know that I was the guy that was sitting next to her in class, and he didn't even go to school with her. So, like, I remember seeing Daniel when I was, like, in 7th grade, saying, "Oh, my God, you know, Casey's so beautiful. Oh, my God, she's so beautiful," or whatever. And I was like, yeah, you know, and I guess he wanted to take it away. So this is why I thought they were straight, because they were fighting over Kasie. But I was kind of kept my distance, and he had no idea I had her in our class and let her, if I had said something, he would have gotten mad. Like I had sort of, you know, warded off away from her. So I knew them very extensively. You know, I've seen Daniel since I was, 3rd grade and shit. And Ricky has known Frankie for a very long time. He used to walk home, quite a bit, and laugh and joke around and play tetherball. And when I was younger, I knew, obviously I was around berry pan all the time. People don't understand that how mobile I was when I was younger. I was so mobile to the extreme levels. Like, when I would come home and check in, unless I had to be home, I wasn't home. Just 1 or 2 days out of the week, I would be home. And it was usually only because, I would be home as often as I could, or I would be doing something. But I was never doing schoolwork. I was never doing homework. I had to be fucking out and about and doing shit. Out and about doing something all the fucking time. If one friend was his stepdad's, like Richard, I go hang out in the hood with Edward Rangel and Marco and the Mexican guys in the hood. If they were not available, none of them were available, I go straight over to Robert Zarati's. Or if I hang around with Richard, I go home. Then at night, I'd go work out with Robert Zarati. Or if he wasn't available, then I would go to Barry Pans. There wasn't Robert would then go to Daniel's. I built a huge amount of experiences, daily experiences with a lot of the friends, because I've come across a lot of friends that people talk about, oh, he's my friend, and you hung around with a dude like, once every 2 weeks or once a month, and you called him your friend. To me, I was spending the night. I knew the moms and dads and shit. We were smoking fucking weed. I was in there. I'd always seen them at least once a week, and I was just so active. So I knew the infrastructure very well. So Brian, after he got away from her and left her, I knew that, I didn't know this, but I had been rumored, or been, I think Kasie had said something that she had paid for all the sports pieces that Brian Yonke had on her car. And I remember that. Brian Yonke was driving this RX-7, and I was like 15 years old, because he was like a year or two older than me. And he would go and pick up Kasie, and he was talking, it was like some kids would do. They drove like a shit car, but they talked about it like they drove a Viper and they were living the high life or some shit. And it's a lot of it's white supremacist. It's I'm the white status and shit, and I'm the Mexican, right? Because the domestic looking Mexican kid who has just a simple mustache is like the Mexican scum to a lot of the whites, right? Because a lot of the times, not all of them, right? Obviously, Daniel wouldn't have been hanging around with me. But Daniel knew me since I was like a kid. I was third grade. He'd stop by to say hello. So when Kasie had said this, I don't even think Kasie understood how often I was around Brian, even when she was around him. Because there was a lot of personal things that I believed that I didn't know Ryan was gay or Daniel was gay, because like I knew Brian Yonke telling me that they used to play sex games and shit, like they were having so much sex when they were kids at Brian Yonke's house that they would play sex games and play, capture the slave, or can you catch me? They'd run around in the house naked, and they would talk about these sex fantasies, and I would just get boiled up inside and mad, like any guy does, right? Any guy thinks about the girl that you want to be screwing, and here you're hearing the brutality of what some other guy's doing, what you would want to be doing to her sexually, right? In this fantasy world. So I got to hear a lot of that information as a kid, and I remember him telling me that. And Daniel Box telling me that how Brian told him that they used to, this is a true story that I knew also about, that Brian was having sex with her, what he would say. And Daniel said this as well, that they were having sex for they would lay in bed and just have sex until they just could not have sex anymore. He couldn't get an erection. He was just fucking for fucking 10 hours. They would lay in bed, have fucking rabid, hardcore sex for fucking, and then until they couldn't take a break, lay in bed, take a nap, and then go at it again. Sex again, like crazy bunny rabbits. And one day, her dad shows up, and he's in bed with her, having sex. Like, I don't know if he was having sex, but he was in bed with her. And Brian always, I think, to my understanding, went there at night. He always, when he went to Kasie's dad's house, I can't think her dad worked at night, and he always snuck in. So he snuck in, and he was sleeping in her bed, and her dad showed up. And I met Kasie's dad, and her dad shows up. And let me tell you, if you, for those that remember what it was to be a kid, if you knew you were 13 years old and you caught the father of his daughter in a bed with another kid, that meant pulling the shotgun out of the fucking closet, and you're gonna fucking die. You're lucky he's not gonna kill you. Like, if you make it. Remember how terrorizing that really is, right? It's like a married man finding his wife with another man and him walking in, right? And I don't know what it was. I don't know if he got his gun and pointed it at him. He said that he nearly shitted himself. He was so scared. And I think the police came or some shit, and he wasn't allowed over there again. I don't know what the situation was. So I knew that. And so I was always told by Daniel, and then Robert told me a few times, that they were having sex. Brian would talk about his sex story, right? Because you always, when you're a kid, you're 13, 14 years old, 12 years old, 13, you want to find out who's having sex, who's your own age, what they're doing, how far they went, all the details, because fucking, you're a kid, right? You're developing. And especially like Barbie girl, right? But Daniel told me this, that they would just lay in bed and have sex, and it was just like, it really ruins any hope for when you're young to think about, is there anything left for me? Like when you're a kid, I'm like, like she's ruined, right? So all guys think of that, but I just thought, well, that to me, I pushed it away very quickly, and I was just like, it's her life, like, that's the white life. So she ends up playing all these sex games and shit. Like, I was told that they would play all these kinky sex games and shit when they were at Brian Young's dad's house, and they would just have sex just all over the place. Like, they were the Barbie and Ken couple that everybody envies and looks at, that loves to watch them together because they're beautiful couples. Beautiful, both of them are beautiful, handsome couples, and they were match made in heaven. You always saw them together, like you always saw them together, like they were match made in heaven soulmates. Like, I'm not kidding. Even I thought of that. Like, they, without a doubt, to me, they look like match made, pieces that were put together. Like, because they both looked very handsome, the way they both were, and behaved around one another. And everybody thought of that too. Everybody, because they had been together for so many years. I was there whenever she sort of gained a lot of weight. And I've been to her apartment before, and Brian was very, very aggressive. Like, I knew he had tried breaking in caught Kasie with another man, and he like broke his knuckles trying to break through the windshield, and because somebody was trying to hook up with her or screw her or some shit. So he was extremely aggressive and protective over Kasie. I mean, very aggressive. Very aggressive. And I knew Brian grew up in a very racist. He grew up in a very fucking racist. Like, his fucking boiled KKK fucking racist dad. Or like mother. Right? Either one of them. But he was really racist. So, Daniel wasn't. Because Daniel, his dad was like, James is like half Native American Indian, and like a quarter Native, he's like Cherokee. So anyway, so Daniel would tell me these stories, and I, as a kid, I was even around Robert Girardi, and he told me that Daniel ended up screwing her for like 3 hours, and I was like 14 years old, and and this was what I was told. Now, I don't know, I think Robert was lying at that time. I think Robert lied about a few shit, because the relationship I had with Robert Girardi was like my brother, was very different to what people think. Everybody talks shit about everyone another, but there was even very few emotions that saw what I saw, how he behaved. So he had told me at the time, and he said that Daniel had told Robert that he had screwed her for 3 fucking hours. So the longer you could have sex with a girl, that meant you really got her really good, right? You just gave her all the sparkles of the world. So there's a lot of this information that I knew, but I never once, ever spread the conversation to anybody, ever. It was only from what people told me. Like what Daniel told me, and I just listened, like, wow, lucky guy. Or Brian would say something, and I'm like, oh, So there was always a sense like I was this black hair Mexican guy with the bleach blonde hair girl. Obviously the blacks had to be away, right? But even for me, having black hair and Mexican, it was always a predatory situation. So I don't know the story. I have suspicions now that I think Brian Young's dad was the one that was screwing crazy, but I don't know the stories to that. I just know that that was the story to it, and he was very protective of her. Yeah, very, very protective of her, and just hovered over to her, and he was really sweet to her. I always saw her, like really just sweet. Just a very, very, very sweet couple. Like something that you never saw with anyone, boyfriend or girlfriend. I never saw any boyfriend or girlfriend relationship like I saw that. Never. Whether I saw couples with, any kind of couple, racial couple, non-racial couple. It didn't matter. I've never seen like you can look at them and see how they synchronize as a couple, and they were together, holding hands. Or he was always with her, hovering, and she would always was. They would look like they were going to be married. They looked like a married couple. I was in 7th grade. I was 12, 13, 14 years old. So, anyway, so I thought it was important for me to talk about this. I never told anybody, other than what Dana would tell me, Robert would tell me, or even a cross-passing friend that maybe Brian was telling him information about. But it was a way for me to kind of make her feel like she wasn't alone. And I remember her feeling very weighted, like somebody found out something very deep personal about your life that you never knew, that here you have Hector working with you for, several weeks, you've known him for so long, and I'm telling her, and I remember Brian coming in, like he'd always come in at IHOP to check on her, and when he would come in, when Brian came into the restaurant, she looked at him like she was fucking had an inferno of anger, like, what the fuck did you just say, you mother? And she wasn't mad at me because she, and it was kind of the way for me to kind of hint, to let her know she wasn't alone, but I didn't want to say anything, but I knew by looking at her, she knew that was the tragic event, her putting a noose around her neck and trying to hang herself. So, and Brian had a big time exaggerating things. I think he told me the story again and said he had to resuscitate her or something like that. So, that was that story to it. So, I thought I would talk about that, whoever it is. I know she had a kid. I always saw Kasie as very successful. Without a doubt, I always saw, she came over to my apartment before, and I've been to her apartment a couple of times, and there was no doubt that I wanted her, but you got to understand how this happens. Look, this is how the team goes against me. When Brian used to walk, when I was 16 years old and 17, Chris Martinez didn't even know who she was. He didn't know who the fuck she was. He barely even knew who fucking Brian was. And he would come over, and I remember Chris Martinez just scolded me away from her because he wanted to help his fellow gay member have that woman. Motherfucker, you're a faggot. You're not even, this is not even you're not even want to fuck her. You're not even a real, and I didn't know this at the time, but you got to understand how this team worked against me, because he was like, yeah, no, and they'd always punk me. It was always like, you're less than us. Oh, we can control you. You're the bitch, like we're the real man. You got the money. We make decisions. This is gay. You could always sense that, but I didn't know what this connection really was until I got older, what they were doing. So anyway, Kasie came over to my house a couple of times when it was abandoned. I remember Kasie telling me of her mother leaving her in the car when she was like, she would come home, she would come to school very tired. I was in 7th grade a few times, and she said that her mother had left her in a car while she was working in a warehouse with some guys working in a bar, and did this for like a couple weeks. They just let her daughter, she's like, how could your mother just leave your kid in a fucking car to sleep all night as a kid? So I don't know what the circumstances, because I've little ever heard about her mother. It seemed to me that her mother was not a good person, or was very abandoning, because she seemed to speak highly of her dad, or her father being in the picture, but I never heard nothing about her mother. It was just like blank. I didn't know who she was. She never mentioned. She lived with her dad, and that was it. And so I think it was important for me to talk about this, because I recall that I knew that she wasn't a drug user. I always, there wasn't ever a doubt in my mind that I wanted, to me it didn't matter. I knew she had probably even more, one in a miscarriage, and but I think that she was more controlled and focused on her selection by the people that were around her, in my opinion, because when a girl doesn't want anything around you, I mean, the whole white thing, because in the racist becomes the whole, she'll use the racist shit. And Kasie Rickels, she had a racist dad. Her dad was fucking racist, pretty fucking racist, and was a pretty big racist. So I knew that if Kasie was willing to talk to me or behave this way, then she was open to the idea. She was more open to an idea as opposed to maybe how she was, meaning that she's making the decision on herself. She's making the decision on her own of what she wants. And she could make a decision on what she wants because she always seemed structured pretty well with the guys that were around her and very much in charge. She was a manager and she had these situations that was going on. But, I try not to intervene too much, into too much of her life because it was just, it was a big problem. It was a big problem even with some of the friends that I grew up with, So I knew how to sort of, it used to make me very angry even when Chris Martinez we showed up to IHOP a couple of times and he started flexing a wallet and they knew I was poor and broke and they would just scum me. And nobody knows about these stories and shit. So it's too late now, right? I can go out with many stories. Nobody understands the brutal punishment of how I dealt with things. And now, if it got into my hands, you were never going to get a part of it. Now it's too late because the president did. So it's like my mother being fucking raped. Just fuck her when he asks whatever you want to, and it's mommy, and it's just President Barack Obama. George Bush. Remember American Marine soldier and atomic bomb? Hiroshima, Nagasaki, 150,000 people incinerated by an atomic bomb. He's ready to kill. Okay, well, all my other problems are just that much smaller. So anyway, so that's what the situation was. But she came over to my house. She brought over her kid, and I remember she got on her knees because my carpet I fucking had my apartment squeaky fucking clean. She was like, "Oh my God, your apartment is amazing," because I fixed it all up. And at that time, anybody who had an apartment that was my age had none of the stuff and structural fittings of what it looked like they had in their apartment. There wasn't anyone that did. No one that did, because I was a DJ. I was very critiquative of the selections of artwork that I chose to have in there and how I wanted it to feel when you walked in. And she came in, and I said some of the other situations. As a matter of fact, Kasie actually went through my drawer. Believe it or not, she came in one day. The few times 6 or 7 times she showed up. She showed up and she started washing my dishes, and she was like resembling that she could be a woman and a wife to me or something. And I remember Daniel kind of like getting a little suspicious, and I didn't know Daniel. I thought Daniel really was a queer. So I remember I went outside to smoke a fucking joint with Daniel, or just talk to you. I don't even think I was smoking weed at the time. And Kasie went into my room. I said, "Yeah, don't worry, you can go to my room." And I forgot what it was. She left her baby in there. I don't think it was her baby. I think she put her baby in there or something. And she started going through my stuff. I'm not kidding you. This is the most embarrassing shit ever. She goes through my drawer, my closet. I don't have a whole lot of shit, right? The clothes. I forgot what else I had in there. But it was an air mattress. I always had an air mattress in there. And I don't know what it was. I kind of looked through the crack of something, and I see Kasie going through my drawers and shit. You're not going to believe what this was, right? And this is really embarrassing, This is not in any kind of way I'm trying to make this bad, because Kasie is no longer alive, because she was a beautiful girl. And I had many years ago, I just randomly bought this shit out of nowhere, just because I wanted to. I'm going to see if this shit works. And I bought some pills to make your fucking penis really fucking big, right? Some vitamins or some shit. It's like penis enlarger and shit. And I had a bottle of it, and I'd take it every once in a while just to fucking see this shit work. I was never sexually active, but one time when I was living at that apartment, and it wasn't at my apartment, and it wasn't even close at the time Kasie was there, and she was going through my shit, and I noticed, and I don't know if I opened the door, she heard the noise, and I saw her get up, like, "Oh my gosh, I think it's gonna skip." Now you caught me, and she came in like pretending to act normal, and I caught her looking, like going through my shit, and I was kind of embarrassed. I was like, oh my god, I left that shit in there. Now she's doing the thing, I'm itty bitty, right? Or I'm this hung guy, right? And anyway, we're around her, and we're watching a movie, I think, and they invited me to go watch Click, which is like an Adam Sandler movie, and I didn't go. And Casey seemed to always kind of, hey, let's see if Hector wants to go, But I didn't want to be around drugs anymore, and I knew she was kind of Danny was kind of dragging her down, and there was so much of I have my own perspective of it. I would have taken Casey in any day of the week. It's just, I didn't want to get involved with the drugs. You do make your own decisions, and the majority of that is because of the people around you. That's why. And, it was kind of hard, best friend, sleeping with a second time, taking her girls, and then taking her for myself. I had done that with Richard, which I didn't know Richard was gay either. So, that's the story that I think is important to kind of apply out there to whoever it may be, is that what kind of made me nerve-wracking about the situation is that Casey, I knew she had the potential, especially when they're at a young age like that, and do it in public and for someone you really don't know, to be suicidal. That she had the power and will to actually do it. And when I spoke to her over the phone, and I dwell on it, here and there, and I think about it constantly times, sometimes feeling guilt or that, she may have committed suicide when she took all these pills. And because I think there had been one other situation, because I kept up with her life. There were stories of what Dana would tell me. I think she had OD'd or passed out once before, and there was like a black guy that jumped into the fucking bed at a party or some shit and started fingering her and filling her up, and she woke up and shit. So I knew extensively, and I'd been to their apartment. I was very nice, and but anyway, I talked to her, and it was just very much friends. Very, like just good friends. Like acquaintance friends and professional, and she's her own self. She's her own person. But I think it's important because when I had spoken to her the last few times and she had taken these pills, there was a sense of, you have no idea the world that I'm living in. And I felt restrained and like, I can't talk to you. Like, you gotta be, they're gonna beat the fuck out of me. They're gonna do, it's really fucking bad. So, I knew she would have told me the truth. She would have told me the truth about it, about Daniel, without a doubt. Even it's what's so fucked up about this. They're probably not gonna like this. When Casey told me something bad about Daniel or Brian, even though I was around Brian and Daniel all the time, I didn't take their side. I believed 100% what Casey was telling me, and I knew she was telling me the fucking truth because I knew how Daniel was in those days. I knew a lot how Brian was in those days and how we clicked around and smoked weed and being shysted on a fucking 20 sack, how that behavior went, his dad paying him $50 for doing the dishes. So I knew that, I didn't know that when Casey started to tell me how much he was being victimized and how guys, these homosexuals at the time, I didn't know they were fucking gay, were just milking her like a fucking bitch. Like, they were just, I couldn't believe that. I really honestly thought to myself she was really in more control than I thought. I did not think that not only these guys were fucking gay, but she was the one spending the money taking care of their fucking ass. And that made me mad. I remember getting very upset and made me mad because we used to live at the same apartment, but not at the same time. She used to live at Centerpoint Apartments for like a year or two, and I lived there for like close to a year, but it was after they moved out, and it was during her high school years. But I think it's important for me to talk about this because of everything that's kind of going on. There was no doubt, like when she told me something, I knew, I was like, and I told her when I was on the phone, I was like, I wanted to tell her you needed to get away from him because he doesn't give a shit about your life. He's going to drag you down to the fucking bottom if he gets a chance to. He's not. and because I knew Kasie could make it on her own. She can, and she was really into fitness, really into working out, and I love that. Sometimes I make my own fantasy worlds in my own mind that we would be these super hot looking couple with like the super sports gear of like Adidas and sportswear, just really good looking, and had this matchmaking looking sports couple, you know, and being young. You know, that's the young sports couple with the future ahead, you know. But because she was into a lot of the same things I was. She was very productive in a sense of goal-oriented and carrying a good figure and working out and being ambitious in life. And was very driven like that. And that to me was the most attractive thing, in my opinion. Because, you know, she would work at IHOP for like, she'd work, you know, 10-hour shifts. 8-hour shifts. I mean, I would see her there all the time. Even when I'd come off work, it was like a hangout spot at IHOP. And she was just a phenomenal worker. She was just constantly working. I had no idea that these guys were abusing her, taking her money and shit like that. And I remember when I found out about this, I was mad. I was angry because, you know, what business do you have? You know, I understood she makes her own decisions, and that's how I left it at. If you know two couples can give birth to a beautiful life together, and they're structurally fit, both positive, both structurally fit, goal-oriented, and very both smart, whether they're, you know, Mexican and a white woman, what business do you have? They're both straight, you know? And I knew everyone knew that around me. And I knew Kasie had the potential that if I knew many years ago, and I always saw her as this person, is that I knew if I ever was with her, I would be very accomplished. I would be very successful because of the structures and the way that she naturally was. I just knew that. A lot of these guys, I didn't know that she was spending thousands of dollars of fucking fixing up Brian Young's car. I knew Daniel was shicing her pretty very, very awfully bad. And I, you know, occasionally saw her Facebook picture, but at that point, you know, there was nothing I could do. You know, you don't understand that a white guy, a white trash motherfucking honky guy out there who doesn't really give a shit will look at Kasie and say, okay, we'll put in this drug addict scum motherfucker over here just because he's white, even though he's going to ruin her life and he won't give a shit. Just because he's white and I'm Mexican, I'm taken out of that picture because of my black hair and black eyes. Right? So, but I thought I'd make a video and talk about this, you know, and it was very offensive, you know, especially when I had seen Ken Cooper come over with blonde hair and shit, you know, and my dad's daughter, and then people think, so you can just take something from my family, and all of a sudden it's a problem over there when I want to take that skin color, you know, like, motherfucker, I grew up in a yellow house. Keep in mind, every day that I went home, my house is yellow. It was painted all yellow. It was a yellow house that I grew up in, and I grew up in a yellow house. So I think it's important for me to talk about these things to sort of hopefully bring light to whatever circumstances this is. So I'm going to talk about some other things and some other topics. So hopefully this will address certain things. But there's a constant tug of war that I always feel like she committed suicide, or she could have committed suicide. And, you know, I knew the structure. There was no doubt in my mind. I knew that she, without a doubt, she would be interested, you know. But she was busy working, productive. You know, she always wanted to be sort of this athletic because she would be around Brian. We'd be at the barbecue numbers of times at Daniel's house. And every time I'm around her, it's always like a sense of professionalism because Brian is always about this. Oh, you're trying that white blonde girl, huh? You're trying. He was never said this, but you could just see he had an attitude with it. Like you could just see there was a pretty big attitude with the situation at that time. Even though they're kind of friends with you, and I recall that I was there and Kasie would bring up, you know, ideas about my DJ career, and she would say, "Hey Hector, He goes, why don't you rent equipment? You could probably rent equipment and do weddings and make really good money that way. And so when she would throw ideas like that, we're like, great, that's an idea. I didn't even think of that. I didn't even think about that. So when she's engaging like that and she's giving an interest that usually the other guys don't see the communication. See, that was a very big problem because you would see the shudder between Daniel, Brian, and Chris Martinez. You would see the shudder, like there's an engagement of interest in public of other men. But I don't know none of these guys are gay. Anyway, thought I'd make a video. I hope that Kasie's at peace and her kids and her family. She sounded very trapped, very trapped. I felt horribly bad. It's easy to talk about now when somebody passes away, but I recall looking at her photos when she started to lose a lot of weight, and I remember just getting very upset and pissed off because, you know, she started to go sort of the stripper route, and I knew that wasn't her. And I know the world of the dance world and all that stuff is very toxic. It brings a lot of prostitution, drugs, awful guys that don't want to be around your life, just want to use you and abuse the situation. They're not there for anything else than a party with you. That's it. They're not there for anything else. And I recall, you know, her losing a lot of weight, like a lot of fucking weight. And I didn't like the fact that Kasie didn't seem to have his control as much as I remember her having. The guys that were around her were just bringing drugs because they could bring her down and then control her even more. And so, you know, there's nothing I could do. That was my opinion of it. You know, the cocaine, you know, the drugs, and, you know, but like one day I was at Daniel's house and I talked about this. He was in lingerie. And I was high as shit. I never smoked during that time. It was like one of the last times I ever smoked. I smoked weed and I was fucking blazed out of my mind. I was fucking high. And sitting in Daniel's house. I was around Kasie talking, and I don't know what had happened. And Kasie walks in, like left, and then came back into the room. Walking. Daniel was standing in front of TV in full lingerie, black lingerie, like porn lingerie. And I was just like, I mean, as a guy, any guy would have gotten an erection, you know, big boner. And I saw her, walk through the window, like we were about to have sex. Like I knew this wasn't because of Daniel, and that's what I thought initially for a moment. I said, "Oh shit!" I think she thought I was left, and they were gonna have like a sex moment. And then Daniel looked over at Kasie and he says, "What are you doing? Like what are you doing?" And he goes, and he like to put her in her place. And I looked, and I'm like, and he said, "Hector, get out of here, Hector." And he was looking like he knew me and her were one out. And so it was a way for him to. And so, like I said, even the friends you have are racist, and you don't even know that they are at times. But anyway, I thought I'd have the conversation about this because, you know, there was always a sense of, I believe without a doubt she had the potential. If she had wanted to, she had the willpower to kill herself, wanted to commit suicide. And if she had gotten depressed enough. I knew she had a family, she had kids. You know, there had always been guys around her that always wanted ownership. There was two other guys. There was another guy by the name of Will, because it was crazy. I know he's a Marine now, whatever. There was another guy named Chris who was obsessed with her, because I had, growing up since I was a kid, I had always come across guys like, oh, and for those that don't know, there's another one. When I was in 7th grade, I was really good friends with Zach Linka, and he dated Kasie for a very long time, or for a long time, and so I knew Kasie's boyfriends, and every time I'd always come around throughout there was always somebody was fascinated and obsessed with her, with Kasie, obsessed with Kasie, And I remember Kate, like this one guy was like, "Oh, I love Casey so much," and I'm like, "Oh, it's another white guy claiming he's obsessed with Casey again." You know, first it was Brian, it was Daniel, no one else, this guy, and then it's just they were always in. To me, it was always kind of like I was just the outside guy. You know, it's like, oh, it's nice. You know, I've seen her, went to school a couple times, and I'd always be careful because I'm the Mexican guy. This is the white blonde hair girl, bleach blonde hair girl, right? So that's the story to it. I knew a lot of the fantasizations that guys talked, and they showed up to my house, and I didn't know these guys were gay. So a lot of them were. I knew Will was, and I don't even know who Chris was. I think Chris was as well. And so I think that, this guy who I knew he had problems with, and Casey hung around with Chris, this guy who I think he also went to become a Marine. I don't know what the situation was. I always kept my distance, and it was weird because you just can't say nothing because it's the ethnicity, 100%. Because the white guy that shows up that wants to take ownership was like, well, I'm not trying to say anything, but I do know her pretty decently well, I'm like, I was always this sort of outside circle guy, and there were the insides that pick what they want. It's just especially when it came to circumstances. But understanding you just make those picks for yourself is how I always kept it at. You're your own adult, and you choose your own decisions and your own mates of what you want. And I always saw her as a very bright, intelligent person, goal oriented. She wasn't scared to go after what she wanted, come in very firm. I remember her telling me her dad took her hunting and threw blood all over her and shit, and there was blood all over the place after killing a deer, and having, cooking it for a meal. Her dad took her, to a hunting trip. So I knew she told me that in 7th grade, I knew she was very hardcore, because the way she expressed shooting a fucking deer was very tough. Like the way she expressed that. And I met her dad as well, who looked like he very big alcoholic, and he was staying at a hotel, and I was very nice. I drove my white Honda Civic, driving Daniel and his daughter and his model-looking daughter and Casey around wherever I needed. And her dad came over to me a couple times. I was in the car and says, "Are you touching my daughter?" Like I was this Mexican guy. Like, I got it from him too. So, but he was just. Casey looked at her dad. He said, "No, it's okay, Dad." I don't know what the circumstances were, but in my opinion, I knew for a girl, because I talked to Casey and she didn't have a boyfriend when I was in 7th grade. So when she showed up stimulated, there was no doubt that I remember there was somebody was having sex with her, and I wasn't sure it was a guy, because I knew she wasn't any of the kids at our school. And I thought that somebody, because it wasn't every day that she showed up. There was just a few times she showed up like this. In my opinion, I don't think her dad was. Because her dad looked a lot like the same guy, kind of dad, as the girlfriend that I used to have, Lisa, when I was 16 years old. And I met her dad when I was officially meeting her, take his daughter, take her hand for marriage or some shit. Which wasn't the case, but when I went there, it was kind of like that. But they're sort of, holds a shotgun and, musket beer, from the Antarctic fucking winters, or the, bounty hunter and the fucking mountains and shit that has no hesitation to kill you if you touch his princess-looking, angel-looking daughter. That's his number. That's his heart. Like, you could tell that's his heart. That's the same persona and atmosphere when I came across Lisa's dad, but I was told that he ended up dying, passing away. He was already pretty old, driving a Suburban, living in a hotel by himself. He was just drinking all the time. And it was a pretty broken down family. And he lived right across the street from me. from the apartment I used to live. Right across the street, her dad used to live, and that's where her dad was. You know, living in an hotel and making me think how bad this world is. But if there's any other situations, I'll make some more conversation about, you know, whatever relieving situation. But there's a tremendous amount of guilt of feeling like I didn't want her to hurt herself. And unfortunately, there's a lot of girls and people that do. And that's the story. I'll talk about some other situations as well that's very crucially important.